is a counselor? So for this lesson, it focuses on what it means to be a counselor in terms of qualifications, expertise, responsibilities, and ethical accountabilities. So we are going to talk about now the roles, functions, and competencies of counseling. So counseling is a reciprocal relationship where both the counselor and the counselee or the client shape the process. So it's a win-win situation because the two of you will learn together. Number one, we have the self-understanding and self-awareness. So a good counselor has a good degree of introspection, self-examination, or self-exploration. He or she should be aware of his needs to be able to be sensitive to the needs of others. So, number one, ito nga ang sinasabi nila, self-understanding and self-awareness. For you to be a good counselor, you need to understand yourself first. You need to be aware of yourself first, right? So, you should recognize your strengths and limitations. And as a counselor, you should develop your personal coping skills. So when we say personal coping skills, hindi yung mas una ka pang nanulumo sa client mo kapag may ikinuwento siya sa'yo. Right? You need to cope up easily when it comes to dramatic situation ni client. Number two, as a counselor, to be a good counselor, you need to be psychologically healthy. So, a counselor is not perfect, of course, but a psychologically healthy counselor should be able to do more than what is expected of him when the situation calls for it. Right? So, as a human being, as a counselor na isang tao rin, you also have your own problem. You also have your difficulties. Number three, sensitivity. They should always consider that each person is unique and that their uniqueness is accepted and understood. When we say sensitivity, the counselor always think that lahat tayo may pagkakaiba. Lahat tayo merong uniqueness. Wherein lahat tayo may iba-ibang ways how are we going to speak, how are we going to cope up with the situation. You need to be sensitive to the situation. You need to be sensitive to the client's feelings. Hindi yung sasabihin natin sa client na, ang simple lang yan. Hindi yung sasabihin natin sa client na, maliit na bagay lang yan. Okay? We need to be sensitive to the client's feeling to be a good counselor. Number four, as a counselor, you need to be open-minded. The counselor should accept the client just as he is. You need to be open-minded. Hindi yung kapag sinabi ni client na ganito siya, may nagawa siyang crime, may nagawa siyang hindi tama, nakakommit siya ng mali or nasaktan niya yung sarili niya. And then sasabihin mo sa kanya na he is a bad person. No, you need to be open-minded kung bakit nagawa yun ni client. Okay? Number five, objectivity. Objectivity is safeguarding against developing an inappropriate or even dysfunctional emotional feelings about or towards the client. So, when we say objectivity, dito pumapasok yung you need to see accurately what is happening with the client. Okay? You need to see accurately ano ba yung relationship na meron ka sa client. You need to be objective towards the client. Okay? You always need to think na yung goal mo sa client mo is to help him decide for himself. Okay? Number six, competence. So, this refers to the counselor's level of confidence of his ability. Gaano ba ka-competent ang counselor mo? Gaano ba ka-competent ang counselor mo while you are having the session. Okay? So in that way, you're going to demonstrate throughout the counseling process kung gaano ba ka-competent or gaano kataas yung level ng confidence ng counselor mo. Seventh one is trustworthiness. A counselor who is trustworthy does not make false promises nor does he give false hope. He always delivers what he promised. So, paano kapag pagkakatiwalaan ni client kapag nag-promise ka ng something na hindi mo tinupad sa kanya? So, for example, at the first session, you told your client that I'll be able to help you cope up. Pero hindi mo siya natulungan. Right? So, to be a good counselor, you should always deliver what you promise. You should always do what you have said. And last one, to be a good counselor, you need a good interpersonal skills. Compatibility between the client and the counselor is always beneficial. How are you going to do the session? How are you going to do the counseling session kung hindi ka marunong makisama sa ibang tao, right? Kung wala kang interpersonal skills, kung wala kang skills when it comes to communicating with other people. Kung wala kang skills, how are you going to build trust? How are you going to build rapport with people? Okay? So to be a good counselor, you should always have the social skills to speak with other people or to speak with heart to your client. Now we are going to talk about the areas of specialization where counselors work. So, kapag nakagraduate ka ba ng psychology, makaka-work ka na ba kung saan-saan? So, as a counselor, meron kang specific areas of specialization. So, number one here, we have the career counselor. So, when we say career counselors, they help prepare clients in starting, changing, or advancing their careers. So, kapag nasa career counselors ka, or kapag career counselor ka, usually nasa corporate office ka. Okay? So, they provide consultation, coaching, and counseling so that clients can explore their interest. So, pwede rin naman dito pumapasok sa school. Pwede rin naman siya because may mga other students tayo na after they graduated grade 12, they are already working. So, they can seek career counseling. Next one, we have the child abuse counselor. So, when we see child abuse counselors, they have the demanding and super rewarding task of helping victims of child abuse rebuild their psyche, trust, and happiness. So, usually, nag-work ang mga child abuse counselors sa DSWD when it comes to Philippines, of course. So, sa ibang bansa, they have other terms for DSWD. Next, we have the child counselor. So, when we say about child or pediatric counselor, child counselors are specifically trained to provide outpatient counseling treatment towards children. So, for example, if you're a child counselor, you're going to perform assessment kung meron bang autism, kung meron bang ADHD, or kung meron bang behavioral or social problem yung isang bata. So, usually, you are working here in a hospital. Next, we have the community counselor. So, when we say community counselor, these are mental health professionals who provide therapy, consultation, and coaching to people who are having issues in the community setting. When we say community setting, ito yung nasa mga barangay natin. Community health workers. Ito yung mga sinasabi nila na nag-work sa mga LGU, local government unit. Okay? So, kung medyo malaki ang budget ng LGU ninyo, they can provide community mental health counseling to the specific barangays or specific town. Next, we have the suicide intervention counselor. So, for the suicide intervention counselor, these counselors have one of the most stressful and at the same time rewarding job. Bakit? Suicide intervention. Bakit siya super stressful? Because yung mga tinitrain mo or hinahandle mo, may mga suicidal issues sila. So, in any time, yung suicidal tendency nila pwedeng lumabas, right? What if while having your session, bigla niya maisipan na saksakin yung sarili niya, right? So, this is the most stressful and at the same time rewarding kapag nagamot si client. And last one, we have the next one, we have the transformational counselors. So, transformational counselors offer an alternative form of mental and physical healing that focuses on self-improvement, spiritual healing, and deeper life satisfaction. So, transformational counselors can work with churches. They can also work with archdiocese. Okay, so they can also work with your pastoral section. Because you are going to focus on the self-improvement, whether it can be spiritual or physical healing. Next one, we have the conflict resolution counselor. So, anong meron sa conflict resolution counselor? It is the art and science of resolving disputes in healthy and mutually agreed upon ways. So, when handled correctly, conflict can actually be a good thing because it results in teamwork and better communication. So, yung conflict resolution, usually, kung sino yung ka-conflict mo, siya yung kausap mo. Because you are, the two party will make their resolution with with their problem. So, as a counselor nun, ikaw lang ang pumapagitan. So, para silang nasa trial. Okay? Next is domestic violence counselor. So, or violence against women and children. So, pwede rin dito yung mga nasa DSWD. So, domestic violence or yung mga nasa DOLE, Department of Labor and Employment or OWA, is one of the prevalent issues that take place in the home setting. Bakit siya home setting? So, when we say kasing domestic violence, ang nangyayari within your house, within your own home, there is a violence. There is a physical, emotional, or moral violence. So, as a domestic violence counselors, you are responsible in helping victims of domestic abuse deal with and overcome their traumatic experience. Okay? So, you are going to have the therapy for them. Next, we have the geriatric counselors. So, when we say geriatric, they are working with older people. So, these counselors provide therapy and counseling services to senior citizens and their families. Next, we have the grief counselor. So, for this grief counselor, when we say grief, okay, so ano ba yung meron sa grief? So, these are usually licensed therapists who help people cope with the grief and sense of loss. So, grief counselors, they are working with the people kung sino yung mga namatayan or nawalan ng family members. So, sila ang nag-work sa kanila. Grief counselors. Next is marriage and family counselors. So, marriage and family counselors, wala naman kasi talagang happily ever after, right? So, merong marriage and family counselors for you to look forward if you are having a problem with your marriage or within your family. Next, you can also work as a mental health counselor. So, life can be difficult at times. People usually have to deal with such things. Okay? Ano ba yung mga such things na yon? Like family, career, how are you going to pay the bill, how are you going to stay healthy. So you can seek help with mental health counselor, or in the future, you can also be a mental health counselor. The last three, we have the pastoral counselor. So when we see pastoral counselors, they are trained ministers of faith who are responsible for tending to the physical and emotional needs of their followers or congregations. So, ito yung mga sinasabi ko rin kanina. Di ba may nasabi ako kanina sa transformational counselors. So, transformational counselors and pastoral counselors can work together because they can work with their churches, they can work with their archdiocese, they can work with their pastoral section. Next one, the school counselors. Of course, alam nyo na. School counselors are responsible for all the aspect of their students' education. From education to their academic achievement, to their social adjustment, to their career selection, to their family problems, and all. Okay? As long as you are studying and there is a counselor, you can seek help with them. Or, if you are a graduate of psychology, you can be a school counselor as well. Last one, we have the rehabilitation counselors. So, in the near future, maybe you want to work here in a rehabilitated area wherein you are going to treat clients with physical, mental, or emotional issues so that they can live as independently as possible. So, rehabilitation counselors, usually they are working. Kung alam ninyo yung magalang rehabilitation, you can work there, right? They can apply their expertise to help clients understand and hopefully overcome their disabilities. So when we say rehabilitation, that means merong kulang sa'yo, merong kulang sa client, merong kulang or merong something na gusto niyang baguhin. So that is rehabilitation counselors. Next one, we are going to talk about the career opportunities for counselors. So, ano ba yung mga career opportunities? So, counseling is more than just a field of discipline in the applied social science. It is a profession that requires expertise and discipline, of course. And maraming opportunity ang meron sa counseling. So, number one, you can work in hospitals. Why hospitals? Because counselors may be hired to help patients get through different psychological and behavioral issues. Ano ba ang meron dito? So, yung mga nabanggit ko kanina, yung rehabilitation counselors, you can also work with hospitals, mental health institutions. Next one, mental health centers. So, as a counselor, you can also work here. So, counselors may provide individual or group therapy. So when you are in a mental health institution, of course, some of them have similar problem. So you can work in a group therapy. Number 3, in residential care facilities. So you can provide counseling services to people living in a temporary environment wherein there is a need for continuous supervision. So, yung mga facilities na to, it can include troubled youth, children with neurodevelopmental disorders, or some people with mental or physical abilities. So, yung mga residential care kasi, there is a temporary environment for them na bago sa kanila. For example, yun nga, troubled youth. Saan ba sila na usually dinadala? DSWD, right? Children with disorder, nasaan ba sila? Maybe they can, maybe nasa mga pediatric section sila, but they are isolated. Okay? Number 4, geriatric-related facilities. You can also work here if you are an aspiring counselor. If you love elders, if you love your grandmas or your grandfathers, right? They are often employed by facilities that serve the elderly population. Okay? Home for the aged, in short. Number 5, in prisons and correctional facilities. Of course, those people in prisons and correctional facilities also need counseling before they come out, right? Or before they go out. So, okay, individuals who are jailed also need counseling. Number 6, corporate settings. So, counselors can assume positions in human resources or public relations departments. Bakit? Bakit kaya pwede sa corporate settings? Of course, as a human relations or public relations officer, you need to have the keen observation, or in short, you can have a counseling with your applicant. Bakit siya ang pipiliin namin? Right? Of course, no, counselors can work in schools. That's why we have guidance counselors. Number 8, career centers. So when we say career centers, ito yung mga, you can work with career associated centers with high school, college, and universities. So when we say career centers, ito kasi yung mga counselors na nagpo-provide ng career advancement for the students. Number 9, non-profit or social service agencies. So, ano bang meron sa non-profit or social service agencies? As long as they can provide counseling services that is centered on mental health, rehab, substance abuse, and other areas of social works, counselors can work with them. Number 10, we have religious institutions. So, for counselors who specialize in combining traditional mental health, counseling with Christian faith, can work in private practice or in religious work environments such as churches. Of course, lahat din naman tayo as a religious person or as a person who belong in a religious institutions, sometimes we also need counseling when it comes to our spiritual health. And last one, we have the public or private practice. So when we say public or private practice, those with a PhD or if you are already a doctor in counseling can become a licensed professional counselor in a public or private practice. So when you are in a public or private practice, you are concentrated in a particular area of specialization. So depende kung saan ka makakapasok na trabaho. So you can work with a government or you can work with a private facility. So it depends. So that's it for our lesson. Thank you for listening and I hope to see you again on our next lesson. Have a good day, class!